noticed on Twitter. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh, who I generally appreciate his commentary and stuff,
Yeah, I
and
do too.
especially his documentary "What Is a Woman?" The very important viewing there. But he spent a few days this past January discussing depression on social media and during one of his podcasts. And in response to someone on X, I guess it's called X now, I always call it Twitter still.
Yeah, me too.
He clarified his position, and this is what he said, quote, "My argument is that depression is despair, which ultimately is a product of the human condition, and to one extent or another, an inevitable experience for conscious beings in this world. I think calling it a disease is a category error and also misses the point, and in the end, hinders our ability to deal with it effectively, which is why," he said, "depression rates are getting worse, not better." Now, to be fair, the broader context of all of this seemed to be his concern about big pharma. He says that, quote, "The psychiatric industry has turned every negative emotion and behavior into a disease,
Right.
essentially in order to profit from the sale of psychiatric drugs." So I was just curious to know what are your thoughts about Walsh's position, and how would you define depression? Would you classify it as a real illness?
Um, okay, so he's generally correct, but it's okay. So based on all of what we just got done discussing, depression can actually have a threefold cause. The first
Mm,
can be psychiatric, which is, by the way, not that many percentages of the cases that I've come across. So, and in that particular case, if the psychiatric side of it, like for example, as I mentioned with hypothyroidism, if you have that issue, you're going to feel the symptomology of depression.
mm,
Technically speaking, you're not clinically depressed, because I'll get to that in a minute. Clinical
yep.
depression is different from just kind of temporary or transitory depression. So clinical depression is an ongoing thing. This is it's I would argue it's a mental illness, because it's a set of intellectual habits that have
Mm,
now taken over the individual, and so they actually get a pleasure. We actually know St. Thomas mentions it in his writings, but you also see this, actually they know this from modern brain studies, that people who are clinically depressed, when they think about depressing thoughts, they actually get a dopamine rush, and so they
huh,
actually they get pleasure out of thinking of this stuff, right? So that's based on that's clinical depression. It's not transitory, because it's a set of mental habits. It doesn't
mhm,
change immediately, but it is something that can be changed by making choices about their thought patterns, et cetera. And so they can actually climb out
mhm,
of this and actually overcome the mental habits.
mhm,
The body does adjust. There's a general principle in scholastic philosophy which says that the body adjusts itself to the operations of the soul. So one of the
mhm,
things that can actually happen is that the body, as I mentioned, it kind of adjusts itself. So if I start thinking depressing thoughts, it's going to adjust itself in order to engage in depressive thoughts, right? And so this is,
mhm,
you're going to actually see a chemical shift in the brain in order to accommodate this thing,
mhm,
and actually a biological shift too. There's going to be things that are going to actually occur biologically in the brains are going to shift to accommodate this activity if it's prolonged. Okay,
mhm,
that means that someone like that. So I tend to subscribe to a school in Poland whose attitude is, in cases like that, what you may have to do is put people on a psychiatric drug in order to stabilize them first on the psychiatric level, but only for a short period of time, because you don't want the brain to start developing all these receptors again and end up with a problem.
mhm,
Because when people come off the psychiatric drugs after the development of the excessive number of receptors, there's a massive dopamine drop, and then they really go through some difficult issues. So they
mhm,
realize it really should be used as a stabilizing kind of a factor, and then the person, to stabilize the person, and then get the person doing the things that they need to do, and then you can take them back off, and then just through their own activity they can cause the brain to readjust. So
mhm,
there's those two. That's different from a transitory kind of depression. And in that
mhm,
case, I would agree with Matt Walsh that it's basically people have a set of something, there are bad things that are happening in their life, legitimately bad. And as a result of that, they go through kind of a despair.
mhm.
And and so this is not, it's not clinical depression, because A, it's rooted in something real, and B,
Right.
it's also something which is transitory, where they can actually climb out of it pretty quickly if they just, okay, I got to get my mind off of this. I got to focus on other things. If they, with just a little bit of help, they don't. Those are the people that big pharma are encouraging doctors who are not psychiatrists, who don't have the expertise, who aren't doing the proper examinations and testing on the individual to make sure that this is actually an actual brain issue. They're just immediately putting them on these drugs in order to just solve the symptomology. But the problem with that is that you're not addressing the root cause in the person's either circumstances or surroundings or in their psychology that is causing the issue. And so you're only masking the thing by this, basically you're deadening the brain in a large way in relationship to these things. So if it's something that it's a clinical depression issue, give them that for a little while to get them stabilized, but then get them to where they can start taking, and then you wean them back off and do it. And the general idea by that is 3 to 4 weeks at the most, 6 on the outside. But then, or if there is an actual chemical issue, which can only really be determined legitimately when they by proper testing. But if not, then what they really need to do is just learn how to process the bad things in their life. That's what they need to do. So in that sense, and I think that's a majority of the people that are just go to say, I feel depressed, go to the doctor, and then they put them on a drug, which that's, in the end, that's not solving their problem.
Right. I would definitely agree with that. One book I wanted to recommend that I've found very helpful over the years in learning about this subject is by Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, who is a Catholic psychiatrist. I used to work at a university in California. I think it's called The Catholic Guide to Depression. I don't know if Father's ever read this one, but I've found it to be pretty helpful, from Sophia Institute Press. So I just wanted to show that to folks.